Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our open session today on the USS pensions and how they will be impacting and affecting our university community. My name's Jenny Fernandez. I'm the Director of External Relations here. I just wanted to touch base on some housekeeping before we start off with the session. So just a reminder that throughout the session, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So please do use the Q&A section for questions and avoid posting general comments such as "I agree." The questions will be moderated, so don't worry if your question doesn't appear immediately, but we will be posting the questions throughout the session. We will try and look at those questions that get the most likes, and we won't be publishing duplicate questions. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can, but just as a reminder, UUK have created FAQs around this issue, and we will send out a link to the FAQs from UUK at the end of the session with a recording of the session as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to George to introduce the session and the panel. George, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny, and good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to see a high number of attendees at this event, which I think in itself is indicative of the significance of this problem for the sector. This is a UK-wide issue for all higher education institutions that have USS members, or indeed staff who are eligible to become USS members, but under the current arrangements have decided not to do so. And that's one of the issues that we want to look at today. How we ensure that everyone who is eligible feels able and is able to afford to participate in the scheme. The fundamental problem that we're facing here is that the scheme is in deficit. The fund is not sufficient for the USS trustees to meet their obligations to the members of the scheme. So UUK is consulting with universities, and universities in turn are consulting with their staff about the best way to try to resolve this problem. The USS trustees themselves have set out a number of proposals and contribution rates, which Universities UK and we at Aberdeen feel are unacceptable and unaffordable. So therefore, Universities UK has set out alternative proposals, which we think are more favourable, but still present us with a number of difficulties. So to help us to understand all of this better, we have Kat Probert from Mercer's to advise us on the content of the proposals, and also David Beattie, our Director of Finance, and Debbie Dyker, our Director of People. Kat, are you going to speak first?
Thanks, George. Okay, good morning, everyone. I've been asked to speak to you today on behalf of your university to explain what we know is happening at the moment with USS and the valuation. I'm not speaking on behalf of USS or any other party involved in the valuation calculations or negotiations. The purpose of today's session is really to help you understand what is happening at the moment, who the parties are that are involved in the calculations and negotiations, and what the timetable might look like over the rest of the year, and in particular, what discussions and consultations are taking place at the moment and how you can play your part. First of all, I'm going to take you through a short overview of the benefits in USS, because to understand what is happening at the moment, we need to understand what benefits USS provides. We'll then have a look at what a valuation is and what is happening at the moment, all the different parties involved and their views on the situation. And then we'll have a look at what might happen next and when, and I'll share with you some places you can get some more information if you want it. First, let's have a look at the benefits in USS. At retirement, USS will provide a pension payable for the rest of your life, plus a tax-free cash lump sum on retirement. This is a one-off payment paid at the time you take your benefits. There's some flexibility in the benefits, both in terms of the point in time at when the benefits can be taken and in what form. You may be able to take some more tax-free cash at retirement in exchange for less annual pension and vice versa. And you can top up your savings in USS by paying additional contributions if you want to. USS also provides benefits in the event of your death, both before and after retirement. And if you become ill and are no longer able to work, your USS pension may start earlier. Your contributions to USS, as for any registered pension scheme in the UK, are paid tax-free, and that means that you don't pay income tax on your pension contributions. I mentioned that you don't pay income tax on your pension contributions, but what are you and the university actually paying to USS? Well, you're currently paying 9.6% of your salary to USS, and the university is paying 21.1%. Just focusing on the retirement benefits you're building up in USS, there are two main types of pension benefits in the UK, defined benefit and defined contribution, and USS has both these types of benefits. Defined benefit means that your benefits in retirement are based on a predetermined formula. In USS, the pension you build up depends on the salary you earn each year up to a certain threshold, the years you've been working, and a pension build-up rate. And the pension you build up isn't directly connected to how much you or your employer has paid in. What matters is this formula. USS call that the retirement income builder. USS also has a defined contribution part of the scheme, and in a defined contribution arrangement, any money paid in by you or your employer goes into your pot. And at retirement, your benefit is based on the value of your pot of money. So this is completely dependent on how much has been paid into your pot and how it's grown over the years. In general, you tend to have more flexibility in how and when you can take a defined contribution pot. And USS call the defined contribution part the investment builder. A key difference between defined benefit and defined contribution is if there are changes in investment markets, this can affect the DC pot, but not the DB formula. In USS, everyone builds up retirement income builder benefits on their salary up to the salary threshold, which is currently just below £60,000. If you earn above the salary threshold, then you'll also build up investment builder benefits on your salary above that threshold. If you want to pay extra contributions into USS, they will go into the investment builder whether you're earning above or below the salary threshold. Let's now have a closer look at how the retirement income builder works. In the retirement income builder, you build up a block of pension equal to 1/75th of your salary for each year you are a member of the scheme. The salary used in this formula is only up to a maximum of the salary threshold, which is currently just below £60,000. So you'll build up a block of pension for each year that you're paying into the scheme. Then annual increases are applied to the block of pension between the time it's earned and the time it is eventually paid to protect against inflation. And if we add all the blocks together with the annual increases, then we get your total annual pension. In addition, you also get a tax-free cash lump sum of 3 times your total annual pension, which is a one-off payment paid at the point of retirement in addition to your annual pension. You can exchange some of your pension for a higher tax-free cash lump sum on retirement and vice versa. You make this decision when you come to retire, and USS will set out your options for you on retirement. Then, once in payment, your pension will increase each year and will be paid for the rest of your life. When you die, a pension of around half the amount you were receiving will be paid to your spouse, civil partner or financial dependent. Now we'll have a look at how the investment builder works. If you're earning above the salary threshold, then 8% of your salary above the salary threshold goes into your investment builder pot from you, and 12% of your salary above the salary threshold goes into your investment builder from the university. So that's a total of 20% of your earnings above the salary threshold going into your investment builder pot. Just to note though, even though 8% of earnings above the salary threshold are going into your investment builder pot from you, you're still paying the full 9.6% of contributions to USS on your total salary. And it's the same for the university as well. Even though 12% of their contribution on your earnings above the salary threshold is going into your investment builder pot, they are still paying the full 21.1% on your total salary to USS. The rest goes towards things like death and ill health cover, the running cost of the scheme, and funding past benefits. Now we're going to have a look at the valuation, what it means and what is happening at the moment. A valuation is a sort of financial health check on the scheme. It's only needed for the retirement income builder part of the USS benefits or the part that is worked out using a formula. A valuation isn't needed for the defined contribution part, the investment builder part of USS. In the investment builder, benefits are based on whatever is in the pots at retirement. However, with the retirement income builder, benefits are based on a formula specific to an individual, and then a pension is paid based on that formula for the rest of that person's life. And then a pension is paid to a spouse, civil partner, or financial dependent after their death for the rest of their life. So the actual payments that USS will need to make for every single member in USS from the retirement income builder are unknown. The actual payments will depend on when members retire, how pensions will increase over the years, and how long people live, which are all unknown things. Pension schemes with these defined benefits or formula benefits, where the exact payments out are unknown, have to make sure that they have the means to pay for all the benefits when they eventually come into payment and for as long as the payments are needed, by estimating what these unknown things might be. The assessment of making sure that there's enough money set aside to pay for all the benefits that members have already built up, plus making sure there's enough money coming in to pay for the benefits members are building up every year, is called a valuation. Valuations have to be done every 3 years, and the USS valuation that's underway at the moment is the 31st of March 2020 valuation. I'm just going to take you through how valuations work now. For USS to assess whether it has enough set aside to pay for the benefits of all its members, it needs to look at what money or assets it is holding compared to what it thinks it should be holding to pay for all the benefits of USS members. The funds USS think they should be holding are referred to as the liabilities of the scheme. When USS is working out what it thinks it should be holding or what its liabilities are, it will do a calculation for every single member of the scheme to work out what money should be set aside now in order to pay for every benefit payment that will be due to that member in the future, and it will then compare this to what it is actually holding in assets. So in thinking about all the payments that will need to be made for every single member of the scheme, USS will need to make some assumptions about the future. They will have to think about the investment returns they'll get on the money they have set aside now to pay for benefits in the future. They'll need to think about how benefits will grow in line with inflation in the future. And they'll have to think about how long people will live. A member's pension will be paid for the rest of their life, and then around half will continue to a spouse, civil partner, or financial dependent if they have one for the rest of their life. So USS works out the liabilities by making assumptions about the future, i.e. how much money it thinks should be set aside to pay for all the benefits that members in USS have already built up. Then it compares this amount that it thinks it should have with the amount it is actually holding. If the assets, the amount USS has, are less than the liabilities, the amount USS thinks they should have, there's said to be a deficit or shortfall in the scheme. And if there's a deficit or shortfall, then USS will look to have the deficit repaired. So they would be looking for extra contributions to come into the scheme to fill the gap over a period of time. Another important decision USS have to make is over what period of time should the deficit or shortfall be paid back. It's not just the amount of the deficit that affects the level of contributions needed to fill the gap, but the length of time over which it is agreed that the deficit should be paid back. The longer the deficit payment period, the lower the contributions needed. Looking at whether there's a deficit or shortfall to be dealt with in respect of benefits members have already built up is just one part of the calculation. The other part of the valuation calculations is to work out the cost of new benefits building up year on year. So each year that goes by, active members who are still contributing to USS are building up another year of pension benefits in the retirement income builder. USS needs to make sure there's enough money coming in to pay for these benefits. So again, a calculation is done, making assumptions about how much needs to be set aside now for these new benefits building up. What will investment returns be on the money that comes in? When will the benefits be paid? How will they increase over time, and how long will they be paid for? So USS work out how much they need to be paid in to pay for new benefits being built up each year, how much they need to be paid into the scheme over a number of years to pay off any deficit or shortfall, and how much they need for expenses and death in service premiums. They convert this into a contribution rate based on the salaries of all active members in USS. Just to note, the size of the bars on here in this chart are not intended to be to scale. USS do these calculations for every member in USS, making assumptions about investment returns, inflation and life expectancy, as I've mentioned. There are other assumptions as well, such as when people will retire, how many people will leave a spouse, civil partner or financial dependent after their death, how many people will retire on ill health or leave USS, etc. But these three assumptions are the most fundamental. When making assumptions for the valuation calculations to work out the liabilities, which is the amount of money USS think they should be holding to pay for benefits, regulations say that these assumptions have to be set cautiously or prudently to protect members' benefits, to make sure there's a better than 50-50 chance of having enough money to pay for all the benefits promised when they eventually come into payment. But these assumptions about the future are just that, assumptions, and there are different views about how they should be set and what prudent actually means. The more prudent the assumptions are, the bigger the liabilities are, and therefore more money needs to be set aside now to pay for benefits in the future. The less prudent the assumptions are, the smaller the liabilities are, and therefore less money needs to be set aside now, but then there's more risk that there won't be enough to pay for all the benefits promised if things turn out to be worse than has been assumed. A really important area that feeds into how cautious or prudent the assumptions are in the valuation calculations is covenant. The covenant is the employer's legal obligation and financial ability to support the USS scheme now and in the future. So covenant is about the strength of the higher education sector, and in particular the ability for the employers in USS to be able to step up and make good any shortfall in the future if things turn out to be worse than assumed. The stronger the covenant, the less prudent the assumptions can be that go into the valuation calculations. I mentioned that with less prudent assumptions, less money would be set aside now, but there would be more risk of money running out if things turned out to be worse than assumed in the future. However, if there's a strong covenant, it's more okay to take this risk because if it did happen, the employers would be able to step in and pay more money if was needed in the future. Although the higher education sector and the employers in USS are seen to be strong overall, USS is currently looking at introducing covenant enhancing measures, which means that it can place even more reliance on the employers to make good any shortfalls in the future. So I've talked about the valuation calculations and the assumptions and how the covenant or the strength of the employers in USS can all affect the outcome of the valuation calculations and the resulting contribution requirements. When working out the contribution requirements, though, there are lots of parties involved and there are varying views on how things should be done and taken into account. There's a limit to what employers and your university can reasonably afford to pay into USS, and it will have an impact on them. And crucially, it affects the contribution rates that you as members are paying for your benefits. Under the rules of the scheme, called cost sharing, if there are increases needed to the contributions, the members will pay a third of the increase needed, with employers picking up the remaining 2/3. Let me just talk you through the parties involved, their roles and their views on things. The first party is the USS trustees themselves. Their statutory job is to make sure benefits are paid when they fall due. It's their job to do the valuation calculations and set the assumptions to be used. USS has now published their results on the 31st of March 2020 valuation. More on that in a bit. Then there's Universities UK, or UUK, who support all the employers and universities in USS. There are over 340 employers in USS, and the 60 or so largest employers are universities such as yours. UUK acts as a voice for all those employers together, feeding back to USS. UUK are trying to ensure that contributions for employers and members are kept under control. UUK have commented on the results USS have shared are unaffordable, and actually the calculations could be done in a different way. There is the University and College Union, or UCU, who act on behalf of members in USS. UCU believes that the valuation calculations and assumptions are much too prudent, and that actually the calculations could be done in such a way, still in line with regulation, that means there doesn't have to be an increase in the contributions. Then we have the pensions regulator. It's the regulator's job to make sure that USS are doing their job, to make sure that the scheme is funded properly and there'll be enough money to pay benefits when they are due. It's the regulator's job to make sure that all private defined benefit pension schemes in the UK are funded properly. And USS is the UK's largest private sector pension scheme. So the regulator has and continues to take a keen interest in what's happening in USS. We know that the pensions regulator got involved in discussions on previous valuations, advising that the results were on the edge of what they consider to be appropriate in order to protect members' benefits. We know that the regulator has commented on the 2020 valuation results again, said that the results are at the limit of what they consider to be compliant. Just going back to the 2017 valuation, off the back of the 2017 valuation calculations, a proposal was made to move the salary threshold to 0 for future build-up of benefits in USS. This would have meant that all members would build up investment builder or defined contribution benefits only going forwards. The strikes of February-March 2018 resulted in that proposal being taken off the table, but also a stalemate situation where no one could agree on the way forward, with USS, UUK and UCU all having different views about the situation. Therefore, a new group was created, the Joint Expert Panel, or JEP for short. The JEP was a group of industry experts, 3 selected by UCU, 3 selected by UUK with 1 chairperson. The JEP's role was to look at the 2017 valuation and make recommendations about the methodology and assumptions. The JEP made a number of recommendations about the 2017 valuation. The basis of their recommendations was around the higher education sector being unique, and this unique nature should be taken into account when setting assumptions, and that more risk could indeed be taken to reduce contribution requirements. But there wasn't time to redo all the calculations of the 2017 valuation before it had to be signed off, so USS agreed to do another valuation at 31st of March 2018. In doing this, USS took into account some, but not all, of the JEP's recommendations, stating that some of the recommendations would have left the scheme and thus members' benefits at risk of not being paid in the future if things turned out worse than expected. And finally, the Joint Negotiating Committee, or JNC. USS present the results of the valuation to the JNC. If the contribution requirements as a result of the valuation are higher than is currently being paid, then it's the JNC's job to decide if there should be a proposal to change contributions or benefits, or both. The JNC is made up of 5 representatives from the employers, 5 representatives from the union, and 1 independent chair. I mentioned there about the 2017 and then the 2018 valuation. Before April 2019, member contributions were 8% and the university paid 18%. In order to get the 2017 valuation signed off and work started on the 2018 valuation, there was an increase in contribution in April 2019. Members' contributions went up to 8.8% and the university's rate went up to 19.5%. Then, after the 2018 valuation, the contribution rates went up to 9.6% for members and 21.1% for the university, which is the rate currently being paid now. However, those rates were lower than what was actually calculated, and therefore an increase was built into the agreed contribution schedule from October 2021. Contributions are due to increase to 11% for members and to 23.7% for the university from October 2021. The due date for the next valuation was 31st of March 2020, and USS carried on with it despite being a particularly bad date in terms of markets, because they said it would give time for them to consider the options before the new contribution rates from October 2021 come in. USS released the results of the valuation on 3rd of March. Just to remind you, the contributions you and the university are paying of 9.6% and 21.1% amount to 30.7% in total. USS released 3 sets of results depending on what covenant enhancing measures are agreed between USS and the employers in USS. So in other words, USS are looking for concrete commitments from employers that they will be able to support the scheme in the future if things turn out worse than expected. These covenant enhancing measures are connected with protections for USS if an employer exceeds certain levels of borrowing and also stops employers leaving USS. If USS can agree what they have called an adequate package of covenant measures, then they said the total contribution rate would need to be 42%. During the initial discussions with employers last year, Universities UK put forward what it thought were suitable covenant enhancing measures that would be more appropriate for individual employers and still give USS the protection it needed. USS have said that with the UUK covenant measures, the total contribution rate would need to be 50%. Finally, if a package of covenant enhancing measures can't be agreed with the employers, USS have said that the total contribution rate would need to be 56% if they just had to rely on the sector as it is now. USS have not quoted what this would mean for members, but if cost sharing was adopted as set out in the rules, it would mean member contributions of between around 13 to 18% and university contributions of around between 29% and 38%, depending on the level of covenant enhancing measures agreed. So where are we now? As we've just seen, the results USS released on 3rd of March 2021 indicated significant increases to the contribution rates required. The covenant enhancing measures have not been agreed with employers yet, and that's why USS presented 3 scenarios. The Joint Negotiating Committee need to start working on what to do now, but there have already been challenges on the valuation approach and outcome from UUK and UCU. UUK have stated that, and I quote, "The very high prices for current benefits put forward by the USS trustee are unaffordable for employers, risk pricing even more staff out of the scheme, and undervalue the collective and enduring financial strength of the participating employers." UUK, on behalf of the USS employers, wrote to USS urging the USS trustee to review its decision to set very high contribution rates. They also wrote to the pensions regulator questioning its influence on the valuation. USS responded to UUK and said that they weren't able to revise its assumptions and calculations unless something changed in terms of the covenant protection from the sector or a proposal for a change in benefits. UUK have said that they'll continue pressing the USS trustee to reconsider its valuation assumptions, but in the meantime have commenced a consultation with employers. More on that in just a second. But ultimately, even if there is some movement in the valuation results from USS, there is likely to be a need for some sort of benefit reform in order to keep contributions at a suitable level for both members and employers. In general, we've been hearing that universities and employers are very concerned about the outcome of the valuation. They are particularly concerned about members, and they're concerned about the fairness between different generations of people in USS. It's not appropriate to just keep increasing member contributions, and higher contribution rates are going to affect universities and employers as well. And there's a lot of concern about people opting out of USS because of their already high member contribution rates. If members opt out of USS, they'll lose their death and service benefits and ill health benefits, as well as their pension benefit build-up going forwards. There's no option for the university to offer members anything other than USS if a member opts out. If you opt out of USS, the university is not allowed to contribute to another pension arrangement on your behalf. Also, universities can't just walk away from USS and choose to offer a different type of pension arrangement. Not only would leaving USS trigger the need for an employer to pay an exit debt to USS, which could be in the hundreds of millions of pounds, employers have to be granted special permission to leave in the first place, which is unlikely to be granted, especially for the larger universities, because the strength of the sector to support the scheme, which is the covenant we talked about, is maintained by keeping strong employers in the scheme. The final section today looks at the timeline of what might happen next. USS presented the results of the valuation to the Joint Negotiating Committee on 3rd of March. The JNC officially has 3 months to decide on a proposed outcome. UUK have now commenced a consultation with employers about their views on contributions, covenant and impact on members, and what members might be looking for, like choice or flexibility perhaps. The official deadline for sign-off of the valuation is 15 months after the valuation date, which is on 30th of June 2021, but USS have confirmed that this won't be met. But any proposal for change affecting members, either contributions or benefits, will need to go to a member consultation. USS have indicated that this is likely to be from early September and that changes may be implemented towards the end of the year or early 2022. In the meantime, the increase to member contributions to 11% is due to come in from 1st of October 2021. We don't know at this stage whether this could potentially be delayed while discussions continue, but as it stands, the increase will happen automatically. Universities UK have commenced a consultation with employers, and that runs up to Monday, 24th of May. They're looking for feedback from employers and from employees via their employers about a possible way forward. They've set out a possible alternative approach that would mean an adjustment to benefit build-up, but would keep contributions at 9.6% for employees and at 21.1% for the university. However, even under this proposal, USS would need to agree to change their approach to the assumptions and calculations in order to keep the contributions at the current levels. The first part of the UUK alternative approach is for employers to agree to certain covenant enhancing measures. Then UUK have set out a possible proposal for benefit reform, which I'll cover on the next slide. To tackle the increasing opt-out rates in USS, UUK would like to suggest some lower cost or flexible options and are looking for views from employers on things like tiered contributions, where the more you earn, the more you pay, having a reduced benefit option for lower contributions, or even flexible defined contribution, where members could choose a lower contribution to go fully into the investment builder section. UUK also want to discuss with employers whether they would support a review of the USS governance arrangements. This is not about the suitability of individual trustees, but UUK feel that some areas of the USS governance structure are unhelpful in being able to determine outcomes of evaluations and consultations, etc. There are 3 adjustments to the hybrid benefits that UUK have set out in their consultation with employers for discussion. As mentioned, the contributions would stay as they are now, but for the first part of the proposal would be to move the salary threshold from just under £60,000 as it is now to £40,000. The next thing would be to change the build-up of benefits in the retirement income builder from 75ths of the salary each year to 85ths. So under this particular alternative approach, members would build up an 85th of their salary up to the salary threshold of £40,000 as a pension block each year. If you earned £40,000, if you earned above £40,000, you build up investment builder or defined contribution benefits on your earnings above £40,000. The proposal would be to still have a total of 20% of salary going into the investment builder pot on earnings above the threshold. And the final part of the alternative approach UUK has set out is to limit increases to the benefits built up going forwards to CPI to a maximum of 2.5% a year. I'll just pass over to David now to talk about the university consultation process.
Thanks very much, Kat. As you can see, this is a really important issue for both the employer and the employee. Kat's raised the issues about affordability, again, both for the employee and the employer, and you can see from the contribution rates that are proposed what that might mean for us. We're really concerned about the opt-outs from the scheme, people not being able to afford those contributions, and of course there's fairness and pension provision across the generations. That's a key issue with this as well. So we plan to open a consultation process with eligible members, and we really want to hear your thoughts. I think it's really important that you have a say in this consultation, and tomorrow we will issue a short survey to capture the views of eligible members. It is a short survey, it'll only take 10 minutes to complete, and I really encourage you to complete that if you can. That will run for about 2 weeks, and then we will consolidate the results. If you want to have a more direct communication or any questions or thoughts, then please email ussconsultation@abdn.ac.uk. And as Jenny mentioned at the start, there's a lot of materials on the UUK website that can be accessed in terms of questions and answers. We will collate the feedback once the survey is closed, and we will respond to UUK by the deadline of the 24th of May. So just a reminder, this is a consultation between the university and UUK. And really what it does, it helps us frame the thoughts of the university towards how pensions will be provided in the future. It is not going to give us definitive numbers at this stage. That will come later when there'll be a member consultation from USS directly to the employers and the members of the scheme, and those will have specific benefit proposals which will be set out at that time. I think as Kat says, we're not quite sure when that will be, probably late summer, maybe early autumn, that consultation will come out. So I think at this point, just urge everybody as much as possible to complete the survey. Encourage your friends and colleagues also to complete the survey. The more responses we get, the more comprehensive response we can give back to UUK on behalf of the university and our eligible members. I think I'll just pass back to Kat at this stage then, just to complete off the presentation, then we'll move into the Q&A.
Thanks, David. For past member consultations, USS have produced a variety of materials and resources to help members understand the proposals, so do look at the proposals and feedback your comments, as David said, and questions if there is a member consultation, even if you've already had your say to the university as part of the consultation that's happening at the moment between UUK and employers. Just to note though, if there are any changes to benefits, they will only affect benefits going forwards. The benefits that you've built up to the date of any potential change are not affected. You do not lose the benefits you've built up, they are secure. Finally, before we end and go to questions, I just wanted to mention where you can find out more information about the USS valuation. If you go to the USS website at uss.co.uk and click on the About Us tab, you will see a whole section on valuations and the 2020 valuation. But as mentioned by David, you'll be hearing more from the university shortly. So I think that brings us on to questions, and I will pass back to Jenny.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much. A huge wealth of information there, and really appreciate you taking the time to work through that with us. We've got lots of questions, so we've got about 15 minutes. We'll try and get through as many as we can. What I would remind people is that the session is recorded, and that the UUK have a huge amount of FAQs on their website as well, so we'll make sure we signpost to those. I was going to start with a question around, there's a couple of questions around that the last USS valuation was conducted in March last year. And since then, the markets have recovered significantly, so the deficit may not be as bad. There's another question here that's looking at the snapshot of the 31st of March, and that kind of an odd way to look at the deficits and shortfalls, reflecting the long-term investment. So is there anything that you could maybe say around just the timing of when the last snapshot was taken of the investment, and how that might, how we might address that, if that's something being looked at?
Yes, sure. So a valuation is a snapshot, so it is taken at a point in time. You have to set a date for the valuation. But yes, I think everybody appreciates that 31st of March 2020 wasn't a great date for doing a valuation. However, there is flexibility within the scheme funding arrangements to allow for changes in the valuation position from the valuation date to the point that the valuation is actually signed off, and that can be in either direction if things have got better than the valuation date or worse. So there is flexibility within the arrangements, and certainly in the discussions so far that have taken place between the various parties, this is a point that has been raised. So that is one possibility that will be brought into the discussions between the various parties.
David, I wasn't sure if you were coming in on that, or I can go to the next one. No, okay, that's great. there was another question around just, so do other pension funds have deficits that are comparable to us? And so there's a few questions just around the size of the deficit and why we're in this position.
Yes, again, another good question. Yes, lots of pension schemes do have deficits. Clearly, the USS scheme is very large. You know, it's the biggest scheme, really, a private sector scheme in the UK. So the actual monetary amount of the deficit is much bigger than you'd seen in other schemes. But as a proportion of, you know, in terms of the size of the scheme, there are many other pension schemes that are facing similar issues, and certainly in the university sector and staff pension schemes as well, there's similar issues. So I guess in terms of the reasons why this has happened, investment markets, interest rates, low interest rates currently over the past sort of 5-10 years have really increased the cost of providing defined benefit pensions. And also, although there's been maybe a slight change recently, life expectancy of members over the past 20 years, you know, has risen, and that has again increased the cost of pensions. So that's a couple of the reasons why defined benefit pensions have got more expensive, and therefore there is the shortfall between the assets and the liabilities.
Thanks, Kat. I've got a question here about what other methods can be used to address the deficits beyond just increasing the contributions. So any further advice around how we might address the deficit beyond just the issue of contributions?
Yes, so I guess there's a few things here. The valuation has to place a value on the benefits that are actually being paid. So one of the options is, unfortunately, the benefits could be changed, and that's, you know, some of the information from UK does set out and I've talked through the example around you could change the build-up rates, the salary threshold. They're all ways of changing the benefits which would make them cheaper. So that's one possibility. So there's an option there for benefit reform to try and keep the contributions the same. It doesn't mean a lower level of benefit, but it's one option to keep it affordable. And then the other part of the equation really is around the assumptions that I talked about earlier. So the trustee has to set prudent assumptions, but really there's an argument about what prudence actually is. It's not defined anywhere, and there are different schools of thought as to whether the assumptions are prudent or not. As I talked about earlier, if you made the assumptions a bit less prudent, then the liabilities would be lower, and you'd have a lower deficit. But it's for the USS trustee to set the assumptions for the valuation.
Jenny, maybe I could just add to that. Kat mentioned the strength of the employer covenant, and you know, the stronger the covenant you have, I guess the slightly less prudent approach you can take, and that affects the contributions. And just to maybe flesh out what that means, what does the strength of the university covenant means? It means that we can afford an extremist to pay extra contributions, or can put extra money into the scheme. And the covenant measures are a couple, and in terms of, you know, it's universities are committing to the scheme for a length of time, so not being able to withdraw. There's also measures that can support the covenant in terms of the amount of debt that universities take on. There is a concern amongst USS that if universities take on too much debt, then that will impact the ability to pay back the contributions to USS in terms of deficit recovery. So there is proposals that the universities may have some sort of debt monitoring framework. We've got to report back to USS how much debt we have. Another strengthening of that is that there might be, if universities take out new debt, then they may have to promise an equivalent security of debt to USS. So if a university borrowed, say, £50 million in the open market, then they'd have to pledge 50 million of assets to USS as a sort of pari passu, as called, arrangement. So there are a number of things we can do around the covenant which are quite technical, and that's part of the consultation the university will be considering. What can we as a university add to the covenant to help support the valuation process and keep the contributions affordable?
Thanks, David. We've got a question here around, is there scope to give members options about the percentage paid per employee? So this is an individual who currently doesn't pay into the scheme because in terms of the individual contribution, it is too expensive. So is there scope around looking at that?
Yes, and again, that's another point that's been brought out in the UUK consultation around whether universities and members would be interested in some lower cost options. So, for example, some tiered contributions. So if you pay in, if you earn a bit less, then you pay in a bit less, or potentially paying a lower contribution, but only into the defined contribution arrangement. So there are definitely some items being thought about there to try and address this high opt-out rate, because the contributions are high that members are feeling that they can't afford to join the scheme.
And David or Debbie, just tied to that, there is a question just to get a sense of what is the level of opt-out at the University of Aberdeen, and also who authorises a request to leave the scheme. Do you advise that the university to leave, or who approves that? So just a sense of the position at Aberdeen.
So the opt-out rates range between sort of 10 and 15%. There are a number of people who come to the university for a short time to work, and therefore they don't feel it's appropriate for them to go into USS for that short time. But we are seeing an increase in the opt-outs for affordability. We do ask when people opt out to the scheme why they have chosen not to go in, and we are seeing an uptick, and people are saying that they just can't afford it, Jenny. So that is one thing. And people are automatically enrolled into the scheme, so they have to opt out of it. So it's an auto-enrolment scheme, and then people have to opt out from that.
Just sticking with that, there is another question here. What is the risk to staff if we're continuing to pay into the scheme? Are we guaranteed to receive payments when we retire, especially of those who've still got a bit of time to go before they enjoy retirement?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes. Absolutely. If you paid into the scheme, as I said earlier, anything that you've built up to date is not affected by what happens in the future. So anything that's been brought to the table around future benefits is for future benefits, that you're paying for in the future. So anything that you've paid in so far is secure, and that will be paid and is unaffected by any consultation that might come down the line later this year.
Thank you. I've got a question here around nowadays spouses and civil partners are often not financially dependent in the way that they were in the past, when it was more normal for maybe one partner to work. Keeping the model whereby automatic payments to spouses and civil partners, regardless of their financial position, is potentially discriminatory to those who are single. So there's just a sense of, again, further reflection of the scheme. Is there any sense that that's been considered by USS? Sorry.
That's a good question. I'm not actually sure on that one, but I mean, it's something that I guess we could take away and follow up on.
Thank you. And what we can certainly do is look at the questions and the themes that are coming out of this session and feed them back to UUK to help inform their FAQs. There's a question here around, I guess, just the management of the scheme. So the sense that, poor management or investing and forecasting on the part of USS, that those currently paying in are being penalised and have to shoulder, I guess, the burden of paying for previous promises made by USS. So really just thinking around that investment decision making and the management of the fund, have alternative proposals are being sought rather than increasing the intergenerational imbalance that we've got within the scheme. What else are we looking at in terms of just the investment decisions and reassurance around how USS is approaching investment?
So the investment decisions around USS are for the USS trustee. It's their power to set the investment strategy, and they will have advisors who advise them on that. One of the points in the consultation does ask about the governance arrangements of USS and providing some feedback on that and whether they would want any changes to that. So that's certainly something that could be fed back as part of a response. I think it's certainly part of the response that the employers are expected to feed back on, but it is the USS trustees' power to set the investment with appropriate advice.
And just tied to that again, the investment, and this may be something that we would refer back to USS, but looking at the investment practices currently published on their website, there's a reference here to some of the types of companies and investments are being made in terms of fossil fuels, arm companies. So just looking at the portfolio of investments and thinking about our own institutional alignment around sustainability and responsible investment. Just do you know if that's being reflected on as part of that consultation?
Again, on that one, I am not entirely sure, but again, it's another one that we can follow back on.
There's a few people have asked questions, and it's looking at other pension schemes. So to kind of take one as an example, do other pensions have a deficit that is comparable to us? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so I think I'd mentioned earlier, yes, I guess in percentage terms, then other schemes do have deficits that are comparable. There are plenty of pension schemes that are finding themselves in a deficit position and agreeing with employers how to pay contributions in to meet those deficits. I mean, in terms of how you end up in that position. I mean, a lot of it is around to things like your investment strategy and decisions made in terms of the investment strategy. So trustees of other schemes may have made a certain decision at a certain point in time, which has meant that for whatever reason, with market conditions, they haven't ended up in that position. And similarly, benefits are different between different schemes as well. Not all schemes provide the same level of benefits, and if you provide a higher level of benefits, then it's going to cost more. So there's a few different reasons why different schemes might find themselves in different situations.
And Jenny, maybe just to add, Kat explained at the start of the presentation the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution schemes. And what's generally happened, and I would say probably more in the private sector, is that defined benefit schemes have been closed down. Just because of the risk and the unknown and uncertainty of deficits. So generally in the private sector, you'll find that pretty much all schemes are defined contribution schemes where, as Kat explained, you build up the pot and that pot will hopefully increase with investment returns. You tend to find that defined benefit schemes still exist largely in the public sector or in some large, I guess, UK corporations, but generally there's been a move across the sector to move to defined contribution. And that's why, I guess, the valuation, or a couple of valuations ago, we brought in that retirement builder and the investment builder with defined contribution above a certain level.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to ask one last question, but we will look to feedback the collection of questions that we've got to UUK to further inform their FAQs. It's just a question around the safety of our pensions. So just sensing, how safe are our pensions if USS, the worst was to happen?
I can maybe answer that. I think that's the role of the pensions regulator here. The regulator's job is to make sure that all pension schemes in the UK have enough money to pay out their liabilities in the future. And to an extent, that's why there are so many prudent assumptions built into the valuation, because the regulator wants to make sure that come time that everybody can have their pension. So the benefits that we've all built up in the scheme so far are protected. Those will be protected again in the future, and it's a job of the regulator working with the trustee to make sure that the assumptions that we built into the valuation, and as Kat talked about, the deficit recovery periods, are appropriate and prudent to make sure that those pensions are payable. So, you can never say never, but as much as can be, there is a great deal of certainty going forward that if we continue the scheme will be able to continue to pay out the benefits I promised.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Kat. Loads of question and engagement, so we do really appreciate your time. I'm going to hand back to George now, just to draw the session to a close.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks to everyone for participating in this session and for the really helpful questions that you've asked. As David has explained, we're in a process of consultation here. Universities UK consulting with universities, over 340 as we've heard, and we in turn are consulting locally. So this is a local consultation in an attempt to resolve a sector-wide national problem. I believe there is a deficit in the scheme. There are legitimate different interpretations about the extent of that deficit, and that's something that we'll need to keep discussing. I also believe that the UUK proposals are a much more favourable way of addressing that deficit than the proposals put forward by the trustees. So it would be enormously helpful if you let us know your views on those UUK proposals so that we in turn are able to feed back to UUK. For now, thank you to the presenters. I should say that I sit on the UUK Employers Pension Forum. I see lots of presentations on USS, and Kat, thank you. That is definitely one of the clearest presentations on this issue that I've ever seen. Thanks also to David and Jenny for helping to steer us through this discussion. And thank you once again to all of you for taking part. That's it for now. Thanks very much.